The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on an initiative called Engineering with Nature. It all started in 2010. And this is the EWN podcast. EWN is developing and implementing nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It's bringing together a growing international community of scientists, engineers, and researchers from all kinds of disciplines that are committed to harnessing the power of nature to solve problems. The EWN podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
Nature-based solutions are a growing interest in many parts of the world as scientists, engineers, policymakers, and many others look for new ways to address the numerous challenges related to climate change. Today, we're talking about how advancing the application of nature-based solutions by building relationships with colleagues in Southeast Asia is really becoming a key component of the Engineering with Nature program. Welcome to Season 7, Episode 2. I am delighted to be here with two of my colleagues and co-hosts from the Engineering with Nature program, Burton Suedel and Amanda Tritinger. As our regular listeners will know, Amanda is Deputy Lead of the Engineering with Nature program, and Burton is a research biologist. Both work in the Engineer Research Development Center in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and both are world travelers. And I would have to say, both are wonderful ambassadors for the Engineering with Nature program. So, with that introduction, welcome back to Season 7, Burton.
Hi, Sarah. It's great to be back and to participate in Season 7 of the Engineering with Nature podcast.
Great. And Amanda, it's wonderful to have you back as well.
Hey, Sarah. I'm thrilled to be back. Today we have an awesome guest joining us, and I'm excited to have him here because I have to say, there's a theme to being on a call with Paul. You're either going to be in a room with interesting people, engaging in interesting ideas, or you're traveling in an interesting place. So I hope I didn't set the bar too high, but Paul always comes with a good time and a good story. So hopefully we hit on those today. And without further ado, here is Paul Cruz. Paul, can you just tell us about yourself and who are you?
Oh, sure. Happy to. But first, thank you for the invitation. Exciting opportunity. So my background really started when I was with the Air Force. I did 7 years. And then after a short military career, about 7 years, went and did my own thing for a couple years and then found myself back with Department of Defense as a contractor. Kind of bounced back and forth before I found my way back full-time with the U.S. Army in the Pacific, where I kind of cut my teeth doing exercise planning, contingency planning, and then entered into the foray of security cooperation. And that's what I do now for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of the Interagency and International Services at the Pacific Ocean Division in beautiful Fort Shafter, Hawaii.
We wish that we were taping this live with you in Hawaii, Paul. Tell us a little bit about your interest in Army Corps and what you wanted to accomplish, why you joined the Corps.
So I joined the Corps because I was looking for a way to get back to Hawaii, to be honest. I was at the time working as the Defense Threat Reduction Agency liaison officer to U.S. Southern Command out in Florida. Very quickly realized how much I missed Hawaii and my family and said, I got to get back. And was lucky enough that the Interagency and International Services office here was looking for someone with experience in security cooperation. And thought, hey, here's a great opportunity because one of my strengths in doing security cooperation for the U.S. Army was integrating our interagency. So I had the opportunity to work with, a number of our 3- and 4-letter agencies, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Department of Energy, U.S. Customs Border Patrol. And that, when looking at what the opportunity was that USACE was advertising at the time, I thought, a lot of interagency work. So I thought that that was a nice fit, in addition to just, being back in Hawaii, obviously. But then the other part of that was, I'd spent my time in the asymmetric threat arena, countering WMD, weapons of mass destruction, countering improvised explosive devices, very operational. And I thought the Corps offered a unique opportunity for me to not only leverage my interagency acumen, but to really get involved in some really neat and interesting opportunities. And so I like to tell people I went from the 8-box crayon set to the 200-box crayon set with a pencil sharpener on the back, working with all these scientists, engineers, and research personnel, and bringing some new and exciting topics and capabilities to the table as we engage our allies and partners in the all around Asia. And certainly engineering with nature was one of those that I thought, this is really interesting kind of stuff. And so hats off to Dr. Shelley Zanizer, the Engineering Research and Development Center liaison officer to U.S. Indo-PACOM, who said, I needed to reach out and meet Dr. Tritinger because she is one impressive cat. And certainly that has been the case. And then obviously that's led to having to work with Burton, and Burton's been just as fun too.
Thanks for that background. And you're probably going to immediately explain to me why it's not different. But how is going from being that independent contractor to this new position within the Corps, how have you found similarities between the two? How has that transition been?
So, when I left active duty military and was self-employed for a while as an independent contractor, one of the things that you learn is that it's truly all about relationships. Yes, there's a transactional nature to it, particularly when you're doing sales. But even in security cooperation, where it can be seen as transactional in some cases, at the end of the day, it's truly all about relationships. It's about creating mutual trust. And that's something that's fundamental. And I think, quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why I did so well in the interagency piece, because when you're Department of Defense and you walk into a room, you always have the biggest budget and the envy of everybody else, as well as the ire of everybody else in the room. And so, I think the ability to just let them understand that we were all kind of trying to row the boat in the same direction. We wanted to be a team player, certainly wanted to stay within our lane and our authorities. I think that helps our interagency partners to understand that we are simply an enabler, and then similarly working with our international partners, mitigating that sort of American hubris, if you will, that we have the answer to everything. You just need to ask us. Coming in and just saying, hey, look, we're here to learn from you just as much as you are willing and wanting to learn from us, particularly in Southeast Asia, where we've got kind of an array of different perspectives, worldviews. Taiwan, a peer country, oftentimes is just looking for validation. And then you have countries like Philippines that are really looking for more collaboration. And so understanding, where they're coming from and how we can fit and meet that niche is a lot of fun. And it's great to have, like I said, that 200 crayon coloring box, because invariably we will tend to have a tool more often than not. And so that's, I think, been the most fun part of this position here.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're having a lot of fun with the work that you're doing, particularly related to the work that you're doing associated with the interagency international services. Certainly has been instrumental for opening doors for the Engineer with Nature program in general, and Amanda and me in particular. Can you talk a little bit about your role and how you would make decisions about pursuing engagement opportunities abroad?
Well, that's a great question, Burton, because here's the one misconception I want to dispel, and that is, sometimes when I'm taking people on the road and we're going to, these interesting places, some might say, when you tell them we're going to Bangkok, Thailand, or you're talking about going to Manila, Philippines, or Taipei, Taiwan, places that no one has on a bucket list, right? people tend to go, well, why are we doing that? Why are we going international? It doesn't make sense for the Corps. And to that end, there's a part of that I agree, right? In my job, I do not engage or plan for the Corps to go somewhere overseas, just to go overseas. So how then do we make that decision? Well, it's actually driven by some rather significant documents, right? National Strategic Strategy and the National Military Strategy, which then gets distilled down by the U.S. Indo-PACOM staff, or what we call the GCC, the Geographic Combatant Command. The U.S. Indo-PACOM takes those two strategic documents, as well as input from the different country teams, to identify what's the specific objectives we have in this region by country. And then that's what helps me identify where the Corps might be of some support. And instead of just coming up with this good idea and throwing it on the wall, U.S. Indo-PACOM and U.S. Army Pacific both have some rather deliberate frameworks that they follow, where we meet semi-annually to discuss what it is that we're trying to do by country from a military objective. It could be something as one might assume, i.e. trying to create more interoperability between our forces. And sometimes it might be something much more benign, i.e. helping a country with their humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, helping them build some civilian resilience. And so, again, looking where the priorities are by region and by country, and how the Corps can be of assistance to either maintain relationships, assist a country with a capability that they might actually need to do the hard power stuff. I think a great example right now is some of the work we've done in the Philippines, where they were asking the Corps for some assistance on dredging. And one might wonder, well, why dredging? How does that help? Well, one of the challenges that the Philippine Navy is facing is that they are getting ready to purchase some new vessels. And yet, unfortunately, the ports and the Navy bases that they are looking at don't have the deep enough draft to support those vessels. And so they've asked the Corps for some advice on how to engage that process to ensure that, once those vessels are received by the Philippine Navy, they have an ability to bring them into their own Navy bases and resupply and project sea power, all in an effort to protect their economic exclusion zones, which, as probably most people on this podcast will know, are under some duress by certain countries who decide that they'll just go in there and do fishing and essentially steal a resource from another country. And so that's where that kind of soft power sometimes translates into hard power.
So it's a very strategic approach that you're talking about, Paul. And I think this is a really good place to pick up and talk about some of the important relationships that are being built in Southeast Asia, starting with Taiwan. I mean, Amanda, you told us when we talked last fall on season 6, episode 5, about your 2023 trip. And among other things, I think you told me that my brain was full coming back from Taiwan. Tell us why.
Oh gosh, I would say my brain is still full after Taiwan. I think that trip was, it was full of real big learning moments. The lessons I learned, the problems, the solutions I saw have been so applicable. And just to elaborate, TWRA did just a phenomenal job setting up this technical exchange week with us.
So just to go back a couple of steps, TWRA is the Taiwan Water Resource Agency, right?
Taiwan Water Resource Agency,
and
yes.
They were the ones that hosted this first exchange.
Yes, and it started with this seminar one of the mornings where, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I think we had over 100 participants in the audience, and backgrounds were from academia, both professors, students, universities, but also local agencies, other federal agencies, non-government organizations, just everybody, professor to landscape architect to student, and we knew that because at the end there were all these questions, and boy was there variety in the questions. And that was another thing that was great. You know, I was able to speak to EWN, they had TWR speak, Burton spoke, and then we had this nice panel discussion where the audience was able to ask those burning questions. And yeah, they ranged from the professor who asked, oh, in this type of numerical modeling, what coefficient would you use to rate, augment this type of NBF, to a stakeholder saying, how do we talk to communities, to a landscape architect saying, how do we talk to engineers? And the outcome was these questions we get asked in the States too, right? The outcome was these problems, these questions we have as well. And it was really fun to share this panel because we gave our answers and then they gave their answers. And together we shared those answers. And I'd like to believe to this day we're applying them. Do you want to speak to your experiences, Burton?
I do share your experience with having a completely full brain, having recently come back from Taiwan as well. I just really didn't expect to be supersized in front of 100 people during your March visit, during that workshop and conference. And but I'm glad I shaved and it looked good in spite of being supersized. But yeah, having the opportunity to return to Taiwan this past October and to build on your experiences from March, I think was a great experience. And all the things you just discussed in terms of what you learned in your experiences there in country, I could say that I experienced as well. I had the opportunity to be there and participate coincident with the Taiwan International Water Week, and particularly learning what nature-based solutions, how they're being applied in country. Having those opportunities to work side by side and interact with water resource agency personnel, academics, the staff at universities, and to present to the students too, to share some of these best practices and try to relate them in ways that the next generation of professionals, whether they be scientists, biologists, engineers, or in other disciplines, can pick up on that.
We'll talk about it in a couple of minutes, but your relationships go on. And you've got more opportunities coming up with Taiwan in 2024. I want to talk to Paul a little bit about the very pivotal role that you've been playing in establishing the initial opportunity for these technical exchanges, and then really helping Amanda and Burton and the Engineering with Nature program build on those initial experiences. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, again, I think it kind of goes back to, where is it that the Corps can contribute to the objectives of the Geographic Combatant Command, U.S. Indo-PACOM. And a lot of times in our area of expertise, the engineering side, U.S. Army Pacific's engineers are very focused on the military side. And so that leaves a lot of maneuver space for U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to operate and just to identify where can we embolden that relationship? Where can we deepen that relationship? The great thing about U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is because, as most people know, we are predominantly civilian. And so it's a little disarming for some because when I show up, it's maybe one person in a uniform, and that's usually the general. Mm-hmm. But after that, the subject matter experts that we're bringing to the table are folks who, not that they aren't serving, they're certainly serving, they just don't wear a uniform. And more importantly, they've been operating in a function for many, many years and have built a breadth and depth of expertise that many of our military folks may not have the opportunity to do because they rotate from different jobs so often. So as an example, when we were engaged with the Philippines on this dredging issue with the Navy, the Philippine Navy, we had an opportunity to just walk across the street, as it were, to ask some questions of the Department of Public Works and Highway to get a much more comprehensive sense of some of the dredging challenges within the Philippines. And it was then that they shared with us that they were very interested in the Corps. They had some introduction in different international workshops. Apparently, they were impressed by whomever it was that they ran into, that they wanted to know a little bit more. And so we took advantage of that opportunity for several reasons. One is because it was helping facilitate the mill side, certainly, but we were starting to see a real growing or budding relationship between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Public Works and Highways within the Philippines, which is, two agencies that essentially have a lot of the same mission sets. And so when asked about, what types of capabilities would they be interested in learning more about from the Corps, EWN was right near the top, particularly when it came to understanding what we did with dredge material. I had an opportunity to go back this past August at the request of another agency, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, because they had heard of some of the discussions we'd had with the Department of Public Works and Highways. And now we had a articulated demand, a written letter from the Secretary of Environment, specifically requesting the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for some technical assistance dealing with 22 reclamation projects right within the Bay of Manila. I took Burton with me to talk about engineering with nature opportunities when it comes to reclamation, some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, in fact. And then we had a quick opportunity to run back over to the Department of Public Works and Highway just to see where we were with this virtual seminar, as we were calling it, on EWN. And what they did, instead of saying, hey, sign us back up, they said, we're having some issues with this typhoon recovery that we think could have been mitigated with some better flood control and flood mitigation. Can you help us with that? Now, again, just because they ask doesn't mean we respond. Even though we may have all the expertise or a lot of that expertise in-house. So in coordinating with the U.S. Indo-PACOM, in coordinating with the U.S. Embassy team, in coordinating with USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, I just sort of shared with them, hey, here's what they're facing in an area that the United States and the Philippine military have agreed to do a little bit more activity. And everyone said, hey, if there is a way that the Corps can help with that, we would really appreciate it. And so it's now led me to developing a multi-year, multi-million-dollar project for flood prevention and flood control that I know EWN will be involved in because I wrote them in, mostly because on the advice of some things that Burton had shared with me on the reclamation side. But at the end of the day, that'll be sort of an all-hands-on-deck opportunity for the Corps across many disciplines, certainly EWN. But again, it shows where our security cooperation opportunities, or what we like to say our OAIs, our operations activities and initiatives, can support our military brethren, because at the end of the day, right at the front of our name is U.S. Army, right? And I get that at the end of that is engineers, and they like to go out and do stuff. And that's great. I just have to try and match that energy and desire with what it is that the Geographic Combatant Command and the Theater Army are trying to do. And when those converge, I get a lot of support. And more importantly, we get resourcing for it. And that's certainly key.
And more opportunities for nature-based solutions.
Oh, this one particularly has so many opportunities that Amanda's going to have to hire a couple more folks.
Excellent. I wanted to come back and talk a little bit about the technical exchanges that were done last year, and then we can talk about what's coming up for 2024. Burton, maybe you could give us the overview of what was accomplished in 2023.
Well, I tell you what, Sarah, it was a pleasure to participate actively and meaningfully in several of those technical exchanges in 2023. As we alluded to, we had two technical exchanges with Taiwan Water Resources Agency and others, first beginning in March of 2023, and then follow up in October. And we also have a technical exchange with the Japanese delegation that came to the Seattle district of the Army Corps of Engineers in August of 2023. So again, all these are important steps, I think, in terms of building relationships and exchanging technical information between the parties. And getting back to what Amanda and Paul were saying earlier, these are true technical exchanges where we're learning from each other. There's some good things that are happening in other parts of the world. There's really good things happening in Taiwan, for example, sufficiently such that, they shared with us a wetlands project in the Nahan River and then a reef project, the Wysanding Sandbar. They are incorporating engineering with nature principles in those projects sufficiently. As soon as Amanda and I saw those projects on slides and then had the opportunity to experience the Wysanding Sandbar in person, that sand under our feet, we knew right then and there we had very, very great engineering with nature related projects. And so I'm pleased then when we reached out subsequent to that and saying, hey, Taiwan Water Resources Agency, these would be great projects to incorporate in Volume 3 of the Atlas. And we're so pleased that they responded on short notice, and so pleased that they are going to appear in Volume 3 of the Atlas going forward. And I would certainly be remiss without mentioning the leadership of Qingwen Chen, who has been the primary point of contact with us during these technical exchanges. He's been blessed with excellent English skills, and so we're thrilled to have him communicating with us and translating English and Mandarin.
Thanks, Burton. And I think we need to do our shameless promo for Atlas 3. We're going to be doing a special podcast on Atlas 3. The Atlas is a really important way of sharing technology and really advancing the application of engineering with nature and nature-based solutions, both at home and abroad. And the fact that we've got, these case studies from Taiwan integrated into Atlas 3 is very cool. So more on that. Burton will be on that show, but it's really important. I want to talk a little bit about Japan. There was a lot of work done last year in Japan. Paul, you did a bunch of work setting up technical exchanges with colleagues in Japan. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of our most robust partnerships. It's with the Japan Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. So that's obviously a mouthful. So we truncate that by just saying IMLIT, right? So the IMLIT relationship is about 30 years old. In fact, there's a document out there that talks about how the Corps and Japan will partner. That was signed by President Ronald Reagan. So that's how far this goes back. More recently, though, this is particularly post-COVID has taken on some energy that is kind of unmatched. And I say that because our engagement strategy with Japan IMLIT is twofold. On the one hand, we wanted to continue to hone and maintain the practice of distributed communication. And so we do virtual engagements. We've got 4 of them already on tap for this year. One actually that we've already done, thanks in part to our friends up in the Seattle district on the creation of mitigation banks, the legal framework behind that. And then the follow-on, we actually were going to be supported by a great partner of ours and another great practitioner of engineering with nature, and that's the Port of Seattle. They were ready last week to provide a technical presentation on some of their projects with regards to mitigation banks. Unfortunately, the recent earthquake, the New Year's Day earthquake, has taken IMLIT in another direction. So we're hoping to re-engage with them next month. But that'll be the second of 4 that are planned. And all of those will lead up to a face-to-face, or what we like to call on-site technical exchanges. And it just so happens that in 2024, it's Japan's turn to host. And so I'll be leading a team to go out And EWN is one of the hot topics. And so, they'll get an invite again to come and join us in November out in Japan, where they will show off some of their projects that are utilizing nature-based solutions and nature-based features to get after many of their integrated water projects and management, as well as some of their projects done for disaster mitigation on the flooding side. That's probably, again, I say that's our most robust because it's also the one where we absolutely articulate doing technical exchanges as a way to lead up to the face-to-face. Mm-hmm. And we've done now almost a dozen virtual engagements with them. In fact, what I'm remiss about is early on, we kept it kind of just, with us at Pacific Ocean Division and some of the folks at EWN and even with the Seattle and Portland, because they had helped us in the past. And what we realized in one of our last meetings was that a lot of these topics could be broadly applied. And there was certainly much more interest outside of just the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii. And so we have gotten into the practice now of sending out invites across the enterprise to all direct districts. And the other reason why that's been great is we've been getting some great Q&A from folks who are just now seeing the value of participating in these. So yeah, that's Japan is certainly one that we spend a lot of time with. It pays a lot of dividends for us. Because again, not unlike Taiwan, they are also very astute at what they do from a construction perspective, from an integrated water management perspective, and from a disaster preparedness perspective, all areas that are mission sets within the Corps.
Yep. Amanda, talk a little bit about your experience with the Japanese Technical Exchange last year. I know it was a big opportunity. Yeah.
And first of all, Paul, it sounds like you're starting to build a 300 crayon box there. That was really cool. And yeah, I was glad to be a part of the Portland district hosting of Japan last year. That was led by Paul and his team. In the Portland district, we had Portland engineers come and share their research, their projects, which was, I think, insightful because that area, particularly in the coast, has high energy, as does Japan. The wave climate, very similar. But we also had Honolulu district's Jessica Badowski come and talk about her engineering implementation experience and share similar issues, similar problems, and how she has taken them on in the district with natural-based solutions. So it was interesting to get our perspective and share that, but I will also say I learned a ton from being in the room when Japan shared their issues and the solutions they'd come up to solve them with. And I think the most impactful part of that is, for engineering with nature, we talk a lot about multi-benefit solutions. And what I saw a lot was multi-issue problems in Japan. Talk about compounding effects. Yes, there was flooding plus wave action on storm events, but there was the most subsidence I'd ever seen. And compound that with the risk of volcanic activity. So it was just, multi-benefit. Sometimes we add it, it's a la carte, it's a nicety, but man, was it a necessity over there. And that was really impactful to see the need for a resilient infrastructure as a solution.
Burton, how about you? What were some of the highlights of that visit?
Well, it seems like it's simply built on that week that Amanda had earlier in 2022 in Portland, where we were able to meet the Japanese delegation in the Seattle district of the Army Corps of Engineers back in August of 2023. Their interest in nature-based solutions in general is still very, very keen. and they really serve as sponges to soak up as much information as possible to learn how they can deal with these these natural hazards and other challenges that they're facing in that island nation. And so there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for us to share that information, looking for ways to develop engineer with nature solutions in the face of natural hazards with similar situations as in the United States, where there's a lack of space, right? You have a lot of built infrastructure there. You don't have a lot of space to incorporate nature-based solutions. And so it's good to try to develop these types of solutions when you lack that space. And because they are an island nation, they don't have the opportunity in many instances to retreat like we might have in the continental U.S. And certainly when we met in the Seattle District has a great history of incorporating and implementing engineer with nature principles in their projects. A lot of these are restoration-based, and to have the opportunity to see those projects up close and personal with the Japanese delegation, particularly the Snohomish River Estuary restoration projects that we visited, gave us, all of us, a really good example of how engineer with nature can be implemented in practice. And then to top it all off, I did not realize up until that point that Paul mentioned the Port of Seattle. They have this Duwamish River People's Park that they developed right there in the middle of the footprint of the port, where they're not only restoring backwater river habitat in the lower Duwamish River Basin, but also creating strong social and recreational benefits to bring together then the local community to projects like this.
There's so much learning, and I guess one of the things that I'm learning from listening to you folks, particularly Amanda and Burton, is that the learning is mutual. So I want to talk about future opportunities that are going to be made possible by these growing relationships that you have in Japan and Taiwan, and then some of the other things Paul's working on. So Amanda, tell us what's next for Taiwan.
Well, I'll say when we were over there, Taiwan's TWRA's general and our general, Paul's boss, they got along so well. There might be an opportunity coming up for us to continue the exchange in person in Hawaii. And actually, I think Paul maybe could speak more to that.
We are actually planning on a visit by Taiwan Water Resource Agency at the end of February. And that to me is a great opportunity, because one of the reasons why Hawaii was selected, probably outside of the weather, was the similar topography that Hawaii has to Taiwan and the challenges for ridge to reef integrated water management. I know that's an issue that the state of Hawaii, who we've reached out to and are now partnering with to integrate into this particular visit, are keen to talk about. They want to hear about some of the challenges that Taiwan's facing. And similarly, Taiwan wants to hear how Hawaii is trying to address those problems, because I think I read once that it's only about 20% of the rainwater that hits up at elevation is really captured, or some very low percentage. I'm probably stepping into Amanda's lane, which is something I'll step out of very quickly now. But there's that. There's an opportunity that we're developing right now for a November visit to Japan to engage the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. This is a build on our engagements that we've done in Portland and Seattle. And so not only will we be talking about nature-based solutions for ecosystem restoration and mitigation banks, but we're also going to introduce this idea of dam removal. It's something that Inlet has not yet done, but they are, as they look over the horizon strategically, they think this is something that they need to get smart on very quickly. So not exactly sure how EWN is going to play into that particular role, but you can see how we try to evolve these relationships, identifying new and pertinent topics for our agencies to engage on. And then the final one is in Southeast Asia, and there's one that's definitely percolating, and that's one a proposal I'm developing for flood prevention and mitigation in the northern Luzon region of the Philippines. And I anticipate EWN to be fully integrated into that because as we're learning of how they're currently attacking that problem and where some of their challenges are and where they could benefit from some of the successes that we've had, some of our lessons learned even, particularly when it comes to things like river nourishment, river banks, the small little islands that the engineers will create in the middle of a river to help with the flow as well as help with the nourishment. Those are areas that were identified by my colleague who joined me on that particular trip, Dr. Michelle Hillary out of IWR. She was like, yes, Paul, make sure EWN is involved in this particular project.
Lots of things moving forward. Burton, what about you? What are some of the next steps for your colleagues in Japan?
Well, as Paul mentioned, we're looking forward to engaging them again in some virtual meetings here upcoming. And we've got on-site visits. I think they're going to be hosting later on this calendar year, perhaps in the fall of 2024, to share some of the projects and information and some of the challenges that they are facing there in Japan. And I'd just like to echo Paul, too, in terms of this concept of ridge to reef. These small island states like Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines, they have natural hazard challenges that are similar to ours, but they don't have necessarily always all the alternatives that we have. They don't always have the opportunity to retreat. When they turn around and look for what options they have to retreat, they're probably staring at the side of a mountain. So they don't have that option. And so the idea is to develop then solutions that are applicable to their situation. And also, we have over a century of built infrastructure in the United States. There's a lot of lessons to be learned from that, and to share those lessons learned with them such that they don't repeat any, should I say, mistakes that we may have made. Certainly with some of our infrastructure projects in the past, they weren't necessarily mistakes. They were fully successful. Sometimes they're too successful, and sometimes we run into situations where they have unintended consequences. And so the idea is to develop projects to help reduce those unintended consequences going forward.
Absolutely. Before I let you all go, I want to ask each of you a one-line answer question. From your perspective, why are building these relationships with colleagues in Southeast Asia so important? Paul, what's your one-line answer?
So I'll take it from a military perspective, and that is we don't do anything anymore alone. It's always together. Mm. And so having these types of engagements just really deepens our relationship with our partners and allies. That's great. Thank you. Burton, how about you?
To me, and to echo what we've already said, it's mutual learning. It's us learning from them learning for us. And I'm always so pleasantly surprised how engaged and engaging they are and how much progress they have made along these lines to incorporating innovative engineering with nature principles in their projects to really kind of extend and go beyond the conventional infrastructure approaches.
That's great. Thanks. And Amanda, what about you?
Innovation and change are difficult things to figure out, and we need to keep trying and learning lessons from those tries and those failures. And I think if you don't have deep relationships that are sustainable, and, after a week of getting stuck in the rain, pointing at wetland, natural nature-based features together, you don't get to a place where you can openly say, that didn't work, but this could. And I think to progress the practice and support a sustainable future, we need to engineer with nature, but we need to engineer with humanity too.
Wow, that's a great place to wrap up this podcast. Thank you, Amanda. So, Paul, thank you for taking the time to join us today from Hawaii to talk about really the strategic importance of developing relationships in Southeast Asia. I think your perspective is really interesting, and it's certainly been informative. So thank you.
It's been my pleasure.
And Amanda and Burton, thanks for co-hosting. We always have fun co-hosting. And thanks for sharing your experience from technical exchanges that you've been participating in with colleagues from Taiwan and Japan. It will be really interesting to see how those relationships you're building will truly advance the practice of nature-based solutions in years to come. And I know that you'll both keep us posted. So thank you.
You got it.
My pleasure as always, Sarah. Thank you.
And to all of you, thank you so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we hope you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
You've been listening to the EWN podcast, developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, for more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN podcast is produced by iContact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.